You're listening to the Mind Over Murder podcast.
My name is Bill Thomas. I'm a writer, consulting producer, and now podcaster. I am now trying to use my experience as the brother of a murder victim to help other victims of violent crime. I'm working on a book on the unsolved Colonial Parkway Murders, and I'm the co-administrator of the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook group, together with Kristin Dilley.
My name is Kristin Dilley. I'm a writer, a researcher, a teacher, and a victims advocate, as well as the social media manager and co-administrator for the Colonial Parkway Murders Facebook page with my partner in crime, Bill Thomas. Welcome to Mind Over Murder. I'm Kristin Dilley.
And I'm Bill Thomas.
And welcome back to another episode. We have part 2 with Dr. Laura Pettler, forensic criminologist. We hope you enjoy this interview as much as we did. We had a blast talking to her.
In this part 2, we get into more depth on the Colonial Parkway murders and issues raised by the Lover's Lane murders. Whereas last time you met Dr. Laura and had a chance to sort of get to know her and a bit about the work that she does, here she does a deeper dive on specifics on the cases and how they may be related, and a lot of great observations. We hope you enjoy it.
And we are joined again by Dr. Laura Pettler, forensic criminologist. Dr. Laura, thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for having me. It is a pleasure to be here with both of you.
We wanted to start you out with a question, a line of questioning that we're continuing from last episode. What made you draw the conclusion that you drew in the Lover's Lane murders that Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski likely knew their killer?
There were several things about the Colonial Parkway's murders in totality. So all 8 victims that were very separate to me. I thought that Kathy and Becky's were no different. And I also thought that they had earmarks. Those 2 murders had earmarks of argument conflict murder. Basically, there's some type of preceding conflict between the victim and the offender. The offender arrives to the crime scene with anger, on his or her mind. And the crime scene, not only is it reflective of contradiction from the standpoint of you have 2 people, Kathy and Becky, sitting in a car where they think they're alone, or if they're pulled over on the Colonial Parkway and then they went up into that area of the Colonial Parkway where they would have been in a secluded area off of the road itself. They were not intending to interact with anyone else except each other.
That's correct.
And now you have a third party, and the third party has shown up and is angry and is intending to cause harm, who is there for the purpose of causing harm. So you have this immediate contradiction, which is reflected in the crime scene, like from the struggle standpoint, the placement of where Becky was found, the ropes, the ties, all of these things are definitely for the purpose of power and control. They're trying to restrain the victims. And then you have this very angry crime scene. Crime scene is always a reflection of the personality of the offender. But I take it a step further. The crime scene is a reflection of the environment. It's a reflection of the society. It's a reflection of culture. It's a reflection of personality. And it's a reflection of cognition. It's a reflection of emotionality. And it's a reflection of behavior. So you have to take it way past that the crime scene is a reflection of the personality of the offender and look at all of those elements. And when you look at all of those elements in Kathy and Becky's murders, it's not as likely that a random type person is going to inflict such severe injury.
Right.
Does it happen? Yes, of course it happens. But is it as common? No. So if you took the statistics and you looked at all of the homicides that, we have 16,000 a year, and you look at, take 1,000 of them, look at the gunshot wound cases compared to the knife cases and look what you see. And then go back in the victimology. Out of 1,000, how many knife cases do you have where the victims knew their killer? I don't know how many that is, but I would argue to you that it's a lot.
Because of the intimacy of using a knife is what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
murder is more intimate than sex. Murder is way more intimate than sex because, like I always say, I have all these very strange, weird quotes, this being kind of one of those, one of many. You can lie with 1,000, but you can only die with one.
Wow.
Ooh.
It's pretty.
It's true.
It is true.
Yeah,
it is true. I never would have thought of it that way, but it is true.
Yeah.
Oh, Kristin, be happy. Be happy you don't think like I do.
Welcome to the...
Well, now I'm going to.
Welcome to the dark world of Dr. Laura Pettler. Yes. Oh, my gosh. That's heavy.
Yeah. No, it's true. It really is true. Think about it.
No, it is.
You people can have sex with 1,000 people, but you can only die with one. Mm-hmm. So, you can lie in the arms of 1,000, but you die in the arms of one. However you want to say it. But when a killer kills, that is an experience that he or she takes with him or her, and that victim can never die with anyone else.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
It's the ultimate power and control.
I was about to say that.
I know you said that. Yeah.
And it's the ultimate punishment. It's the ultimate prevention of abandonment. It's the ultimate everything to have someone and to feel the transition of life to death in your hands like that. I've never experienced that outside of my own father's death, and he died in my arms. And I know the feeling of when a person is alive to when a person literally exhales and is no longer alive. And this was in a hospital setting, of course, with lots of medical intervention. But think about it out there in the woods. Think about it along a road. Think about it, from all those standpoints. And then also there's a question. One of the questions I got on social media was, did the medical examiners think that did they conclude that the wound pattern to the neck area of both victims, Kathy and Becky, was done from behind? I can tell you this, that a lot of times in argument, conflict murder, any kind of retaliatory murder, offenders do like to attack from behind. Mm-hmm. They like to ambush victims. Do they also like to go straight for the jugular? Yes. But they also do like to attack from behind. So for me, the murders of Kathy and Becky were so different than the other 6 murders. And the other ones look property crime related to me, for personal gain.
Yes.
They look somehow personal gain related. But the number one reason that serial killers kill is for personal gain. It is because they're for money. Statistically, the last time I looked, and I don't look at those statistics every day, so if it changed, I don't know it. But the last time I was reading about it, the number one reason, the number one motive behind serial killings is most often personal gain of some kind, monetary personal gain. So could Kathy and Becky's homicides have been first? Could they be completely separate and apart from the other 6 that appear to have more of a personal gain property tone to them? Maybe. Mm-hmm. But could it also be someone who kills Kathy and Becky, gets really, really excited and has this huge cathartic, euphoric, emotional release? Because when you kill the way that they were killed, you do not arrive to the crime scene the way you leave if you are an offender. You do not arrive the same way as when you leave. You arrive kind of pent up, and then you leave euphoric. Right. A lot of times you'll see these kind of offenders who kill like Kathy and Becky have some type of a traffic violation after leaving the scene because they run a stop sign, they speed. Right. Yes, they speed. So like if that was a hot case to me, one of the things I would have said was pull every single traffic violation from that night from, 100 miles. Right. Seriously, I would have gone really broad because they're just like high, they're high off of it and they're just driving away. So they miss a red light or they miss a stop sign or they end up speeding and don't even realize they're doing it. Sometimes we find them, walking away. And also what is interesting is most of those types of homicides we see offenders walking to and from the scene. They do bring weapons to the scene and take them from the scene, but they're also notorious for weapons of opportunity. Like kitchen knives if you're in the kitchen, a lamp if you're in the bedroom, things like that. We see like a lot of different weaponry in argument, conflict, murder, because sometimes this, like, the emotion is happening as they're talking. And then as they're talking, they end up arguing. As they argue, it ends up physical. The argument turns into a physical altercation. And so they just like grab, weapons that they can.
Right. And the situation escalates.
But this one was planned. Yeah, but theirs was planned. Theirs was definitely planned.
It's important, too, to a couple of quick notes. First of all, we have more information in Kathy and Becky's murder than we do in the other Colonial Parkway murders. It's the only one of the 4 double homicides where the bodies end up back in the vehicle. In the other situations, and I remember you explaining this to us when we were shooting the show, we end up with the separation. In some cases, Keith and Sandy's example, the bodies and the car are separated and the bodies are never relocated. So we actually don't know anywhere near as much the second, third, and fourth double homicides as we do the first. Real important to note, whoever killed Kathy and Becky came to that car, because I don't necessarily think the car is the crime scene. They came to the car with rope, a knife or knives, and fire to some extent. They brought diesel fuel or kerosene and made an attempt to set the car on fire. Irv Wells, the former FBI special agent in charge of the case, said in the television series this was a case of overkill, where there's all of this significant level of violence directed at these 2 women. And it appears, according to Kathy's autopsy report, that she died from strangulation, as did Becky. You pointed out on the show that you believe that Kathy and Becky were already dead when their throats were cut. What made you say that? What makes you conclude, with the limited information you have, that it appears that Kathy and Becky were already dead when their throats were cut?
From what I remember from the crime scene photos, there didn't appear to be expirated blood on Becky or Kathy's faces. And so if sometimes when you're cut in the throat and you go through, you partially go into the windpipe, the esophagus there, a lot of times you see people spitting blood and spitting, expirated blood and air, kind of, it has bubbles in it and things like that. And I didn't see that in those cases. So like for me, were they incapacitated or unconscious or not breathing at the time where their throats were slashed? Because I just would have thought maybe there would be some evidence of them breathing as they're dying, breathing literally the blood in and out of that windpipe.
Yeah, and that evidence is not there. Kathy's face actually is remarkably clean and clear for someone who's just been murdered.
Right. And so, I don't see evidence of cleanup, like that the offender wiped the face clean. There would have to be a reason to do that. There is no reason to do that. And so because there's no expirated blood, I mean, when you're talking wounds like that sever the windpipe, I would just have expected to see different blood.
One other thing that's worth noting, too, I know some people have asked us about the fact that in case number 2, Robin Edwards and David Knobling, they were shot and then their bodies were dumped in the water. Now, David has a shot through the shoulder and then a kill shot to the head. And then Robin, forgive me for being too graphic here, is also shot through the head. One of the things that the investigators have pointed out is it's quite possible that this person or persons would use a gun to establish control in the early stages of the interaction between an offender and prospective victims. And this is what Jim Clemente pointed out when he was trying to walk your fellow investigators through what's involved in a single offender gaining control of a couple. But he said if you have the use of a firearm, even if you don't use it, you could establish control over 2 healthy young people in these examples.
Oh, yeah. Offenders like to use weapons power assertive offenders who are the kind that you're seeing in different, like Kathy and Becky's homicide to me has elements of power and control, but it's an anger retaliatory crime scene for me. When you're talking about David and Robin, that is a power assertive crime scene for me. It's a totally different personality. It's very different. So offenders that carry weapons, they are symbolic of power and control for those offenders. They are what make the offender feel more powerful. And so like a firearm is an extension of the persona, of the offender that carries a gun or carries a knife. So when they brandish that, when they wield that pointed at somebody, normal people, anybody sees a gun, think of a bank robbery. There's one guy with a gun and 25 people in the bank.
Sure.
That as soon as somebody says he's got a gun, they go to the ground.
Right.
So it is completely fathomable and easy to go into a place where you've got a young girl. She's young. She's very young. She's not like, a person who's like not going to listen. She's most likely going to listen. She is with David and somebody somehow comes up to them with a gun. Mm-hmm. They're going to respect the fact that, and here's what here's what I always tell my girls, my daughter and my other daughter, who's not my biological daughter, but who I've raised since she was 13. This is what I've always told my girls. And this is what I told them all growing up. Because as you can imagine, I was a fanatical mother.
Why are we not surprised?
Had to know them. I had to know where they were every second of every minute of every hour of every day. They had no privacy, and they were, clearly very angry about this for the entire time I grew up. But you can't have a mother like me and have children like them running rampant, running loose with no, surveillance. It's just not going to happen because I just know what's out in the world. I'm doing it every day. I fight the darkness every single day of my life and come out at night or come out when I'm finished working and, reconnect as a human being to other human beings. It's almost like a double life in a lot of ways, to work murder all day and then come out and be normal at the end of that every day. So no, they didn't have a normal life. But here's why. Here's the point of this. When you walk up to someone with a gun in the Walmart parking lot and say, don't make a move, don't scream, or I'm going to shoot you, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to do something to you. A lot of people will say, okay, just don't hurt me. Just go, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? They immediately want to know what the offender wants. They immediately want to offer whatever it is. Do you want my purse? Do you want my wallet? Take it, right? You hear people say, that's what I told them. A guy ran up to me. He had a gun. He pointed the gun at me and said, be quiet. And I was just like, whatever you want, take it,
right, just comply.
Right. And so for me, most people are going to think and believe that people are good and believe in the goodness of people, where if somebody tells them, I'm not going to hurt you, you just need to do what I'm telling you to do, they're going to believe that if they do what the person tells them to do, they're going to come out alive. And what I told my girls was, no. We do not operate under that premise. If they're going to kill you, they're going to kill you in the Walmart parking lot. You, under no circumstances, go anywhere with somebody that's brandishing a gun. If someone is pointing a gun at you, trying to hold you up with a gun somehow, they can kill you right there, but you're not going. And that's how I raised them, to absolutely not go, because the survival rate drops. Can you imagine percentage wise, if we were to study it, by tremendous droppage after, it decreases tremendously as soon as you get in the car with the offender.
Or allow yourself to be walked away.
Allow yourself to be walked away from your vehicle. There's a reason they're wanting to take you out of your vehicle, because that vehicle is power.
Right. You could escape, etc.
You can escape. You can do all these things. They want to separate you from anything that would lead to you being able to escape or survive, because their point is to kill. Your point is to live. They're separating you from your weapons, your car, or whatever it is that you have.
Right.
And so, no, for me, Kathy and Becky, anger retaliatory. David and Robin, power assertive. Could you have strains of power assertive in the overall thematic, polythematic crime scene that is Kathy and Becky? Yes. But for me, they're just those two. When you take them apart, they're very, very different.
Well, and Keith and Sandy, who disappear and we have no bodies, and we actually, as you pointed out when we were shooting, we actually don't even think we have a crime scene. All we have is Keith's Toyota Celica sitting on a half-moon turnout along the Colonial Parkway, a similar spot to where Kathy and Becky's car was found a year and a half prior. But we actually, as you pointed out, we actually don't even know that a crime has occurred at the location where Keith's Toyota was found. It's just on a bluff overlooking the York River that is somewhat similar to a spot a mile or so away where Kathy and Becky's car was found. We don't even know from what we have on scene that a murder has taken place. All we have is a Toyota Celica with some clothes in the backseat.
Right. That one definitely, if those are all related, like if Keith's crime scene is related to Robin and David, there's much more similarity between the two of those crime scenes than there is to Kathy and Becky's, except for location. And behavior is purposeful. Unless someone is psychotic, behavior is typically purposeful. There's a payoff for it. People don't move toward pain necessarily unless there's a payoff. There are people that like pain.
Right.
Sure. But the payoff is that they like it and they're aroused by it, or sexually aroused, or some type of arousal. It gives them some kind of payoff. But people that are not into pain, people are moving away from needles, from the knife, from the gun, from whatever. People are like, no, that's going to hurt. I'm not doing it.
Right.
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 And so we don't know enough in Keith and Cassandra. We don't know enough.
And in case number 4, Phelps Lauer, Daniel and Anna Maria, speaking of intentionality, they appear to have been separated from their vehicle and they're marched into the woods in this hunt club, basically. It's an old logging road, but they appear to have been marched into the woods, and the bodies end up lying side by side under a plaid electric blanket that was in David's car when they were on their way down to Virginia Beach. What do you make of lying the two victims side by side in the woods and covering them with a blanket? That feels very different from the other 3 crime scenes as well.
Yeah, it is very different. Well, the first answer, the answer to every question, no matter what we're talking about, is always because it meets the needs of the offender. You have to go deeper than that. Yes, offenders have needs just like everyone else. And people kill like under very normal conditions. It's they're not so mentally ill or psychotic the way that sometimes it's portrayed in fictional crime shows. It's not like that a lot of times. It's really more simplistic than that. When you get down to taking and peeling back all these layers, it's just not as complicated. I think that sometimes things are overanalyzed in homicide. And instead, we need to take it back up a couple levels toward macro, because you get too micro and then you get lost in the minutia of it. And I think that theirs was very simple. One of the interesting things about their case is that they are covered. Kathy and Becky are also covered.
Oh, in a different way, right? By the car.
Yes, but there's covering. There's covering in these cases, in the 3 cases that we know of, because we don't have bodies in the 2.
Correct.
We don't have 2, 2 of the body, so we don't know if they were covered.
Right. We don't even know how they died.
Right. So there's from the crime scene staging standpoint, one of the things that we're currently working on now is this phenomenal, and I say phenomenal because I'm really excited about it, is this new taxonomy of staging. So instead of talking about crime scene staging, we're taking it up. We're moving away from calling everything crime scene staging and moving to the term staging, because in staging, it is the manipulative, purposeful tampering of a crime scene for the purpose of personal gain.
You're listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll be right back after these messages. One of the most frequent questions we're asked here at Mind Over Murder is, how can I help?
Thanks to Othram, a leading forensic DNA testing lab for law enforcement, you can get involved and help solve real cases.
If you have tested at a consumer genetics company, you can contribute your data to DNAsolves.com. The process is easy and confidential. Just 2 simple steps. Your DNA might be the missing piece that helps solve the identity of an unknown person.
Then Mind Over Murder will highlight cases Othram is working on to seek your crowdfunding support for DNA testing to help solve these cold cases.
Upload your DNA profile to DNAsolves.com. It's easy, free, and confidential.
Then join Mind Over Murder as we help families find answers with Othram and DNAsolves.com. Do you like our show, Mind Over Murder, and want to create your own podcast?
Well then, let us tell you about Anchor.
First of all, it's free. And who doesn't love free, right?
I like free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer.
You can even add any song from Spotify directly to your episodes. The possibilities are endless for what you can create, whether it's music analysis, your own radio show, or something the world's never heard before.
Anchor will then distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more platforms.
And you can even make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership.
I like the sound of that. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Right here, Anchor.
Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started on your own podcast.
You can tell them Kristin and Bill from Mind Over Murder sent you. Welcome back to Mind Over Murder.
Whether that personal gain is avoiding apprehension, which is always the primary one. Mm-hmm. It could be for money. It could be to keep a secret. There's always different personal gains with staged murder. One of the interesting things that in this new taxonomy is this idea of you have staging as the broad heading. And then under that, you have 3 kinds. You've got linguistic, you've got nonverbal, and then you've got the physical. You've got the visual staging elements in the crime scene. When it comes to offenders on the visual elements of a crime scene, a lot of times anger retaliatory offenders like to cover the eyes of their victims. They don't like them to be able to see. It's a way that they have power and control over the scene and over the victim. So I remember, and Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember in Kathy and Becky's scene, Becky's eyes are not faced upward.
That's correct.
Right. And that is consistent with the anger retaliatory idea of, I'm turning you away from me because when I look at you, I can look at you anytime I want to look at you, but you don't have the ability to look at me.
Right. And Jim Clementi pointed this out in Phelps Lauer, number 4, that it appeared, now forgive me, folks, it appered that animals had gotten at the body, so they may have been moved, but they think that they were laying face down in the woods, side by side under a blanket.
And that's where I was going with this, that they are covered with a blanket. So even if they're face up, which sometimes we have anger retaliatory offenders leave the victim face up, but what's in my head right now is thinking of a bedroom crime scene, which we've had so many of those over the years. We have a lot of victims and they're typically female. They're face up, but there's a pillow over their head or their clothing is pulled up over their head so that they can't see, or the blankets are pulled up over their head, if they're face up. But then the same way as if they're face down in a bed or anything else where they are covered in some way. And so the covering of them is a purposeful behavior. Offender didn't need to cover them, didn't need to cover them to kill them, didn't need to cover them to dump them. That's a purposeful behavior that had a payoff of some kind. Was it because the offender did not want them looking at him? Was it that whole power and control thing over the anger retaliatory crime scene? Or did it serve some other purpose? When you examine all of the other things that it could have done, was it for the purpose of concealing? Sometimes they do hide bodies like that for the purpose of concealing, but it could also have been just, because that was what the offender needed at the end of the day. We don't know why. The offender knows why. Sometimes, and this is like when I teach bloodstain pattern analysis, when I have young little grasshoppers wanting to learn bloodstain pattern analysis, they want to analyze every single little bloodstain, every single one. And they are numerous, in one distribution of blood, you have all of these bloodstains. You could have 300, 500, you could have so many. And they went, oh, Dr. Pettler, let me look at this one. Oh, let's analyze this one. Slow your roll. We don't need to analyze every single blood stain in a distribution. There are certain elements of that blood stain pattern, of that distribution, certain blood stains that are going to yield the information that we need, the raw data to process it through the metrics to calculate both area of impact, height above the floor, or whatever it is. We don't need every single blood stain.
Right.
We can look at them as a group. So when you're looking at crime scene characteristics of an offender, or like in this case, when we're looking at the crime scene where the bodies are most likely face down and then covered up, that's layers again. One of the things that we're seeing in all of these scenes is the layer. Not only the layers of injury, but the layers of behavior. Like one leads to one goes to this, to this, to this. To cover them up, you got to have them on the ground first. And to put them face down, they have to be on the ground first. So what comes first? They're on the ground. What comes second? They're put face down. What comes third? So the sequence of events can sometimes be established in behavioral patterns like this. Why is a qualitative question that is answered in context with the overall totality of the scene. The quantitative aspects of this scene are face down, on the ground, covered up. Those are static, quantitative aspects of a scene. The qualitative aspects of the scene are what was the thing that covered them up? Is it a pallet? Is it a blanket? Is it a mattress? Is it bedding from the house? Okay. So like we know that it's a blanket from the car, right, Bill?
Right. It was in the car with them on the way.
Right. Because they're traveling.
Correct. And they have a bunch of clothes and other things that Daniel was bringing to move in with his brother Clint and his brother Clint's girlfriend, Anna.
Right. So that's a quote unquote weapon of opportunity. That's not brought with them. So she didn't plan to cover them up.
Right.
There was no plan to cover them up with a blanket, because had there been a plan to cover them up with a blanket, the offender would have brought the blanket to the scene.
Right. And this is property that was contained within their vehicle. You mentioned something that's really important too. An area where we dropped the ball, and I'm saying we because I was a consulting producer on the show. An area where we dropped the ball is in the discussion of the wallets. In the first 2 episodes, there's a good deal of conversation between Jim, Lonnie, and Maureen about the wallets. For everyone's benefit, I think it's incredibly important. Something that got dropped in the editing process is that in case number 4 specifically, Daniel Lauer had $600 to $800 in his wallet. He had collected a bunch of money from painting jobs that he had done with his dad that summer. Now, keep in mind, it's a Labor Day weekend. And he was moving in with his brother and his brother's girlfriend to help them make ends meet at this new apartment down in Virginia Beach. And they were struggling financially. Right. The electricity had been turned off. They were working like burger flipping jobs. These are kids that are just out of high school.
Young.
And they were, trying to make a go of it. And it wasn't going that well, quite frankly. And so he was heading down there with a big wad of cash. And remember, this is 1989 and $600 to $800 is a lot of money to me now. It was a ton of money back then. And that money and his wallet went missing. We should have made that point in the Lover's Lane murders, and that through line of the discussion of the wallets got cut. And so the robbery possibility is stronger in Daniel and Anna's case than it is in any of the others. My recollection is that when Keith and Sandy went missing, I'm not sure about Sandy's wallet. I remember seeing pictures of her purse. I might have to check with her sisters or her parents. Keith's wallet was there, and I think it had money in it, in a similar fashion to some of the other crime scenes. A wallet went missing that belonged to Daniel Lauer that was filled with cash. So there could have been a robbery motive there. And by the way, some of their friends, including a couple of people that I would put in the ne'er-do-well category, knew that he had collected a bunch of money and that he was heading down to Virginia Beach with a bunch of cash. That money disappears, and I think it's important that we make note of that. I can't put it into the television series because the series is done. But people have asked us about that, and they said, what about the wallets in incidents 3 and 4? And the truth is they're actually raising an important issue. As you point out, there's a benefit to an offender in addition to other possible benefits. Robbery is a possible motive.
Is one. That can be one motive, like in staged homicides, there's usually more than one motive. Sometimes the primary motive might be to kill for money because there's a debt, they're behind in a mortgage or something, and the person's more valuable to them dead than alive. But then there's also, like in the case of Scott and Lacey Peterson, there's no anger in that crime scene. That's most likely a soft kill, kind of like a strangulation or something, maybe with a pillow or something like that. And then he just dumps her. He takes her straight from life to death to dump. Why? Because he needs her out of the way. Why? Because he needs to go on with his life. Why? Because he doesn't want the life she's about to have. They're about to have a baby, and he doesn't want to have that life. So he's got to get her out of the way to get that obstacle removed so that he can pursue a life that he wants with Amber Fry or with whomever, a totally different life. Totally different when you look at Ron Goldman and Nicole Simpson. Totally different. It's a very, that scene has earmarks of the same kind of scene that we have in Kathy and Becky's case. It's very anger retaliatory. Right. And what's the payoff? The payoff is that all the anger is dumped into these victims with every blow. But not with Kathy and Becky's scene, but with the other 3 scenes, could you rule out robbery? I don't think you could in any of the cases. Now, could the FBI? Sure, because they've got the case files and they know what's going on. Yeah. But from our standpoint, it's completely speculative, and that's the best that you're going to get. With no case files, we know such limited information. Nobody can conclude, as far as, I can't conclude because I don't know as much as Maureen and Lonnie and Jim did because that wasn't my role. What I do know, and I'm sure that, in their cases, they're definitely not drawing conclusions either, and nothing is like a firm conclusion because they are all incredible practitioners and definitely would never render a conclusion without a case file. They're basically saying the same thing I am, I think, which is based on what we know, or what we think we know, or maybe we should say based on what we think, because we don't really know. There's elements maybe of Kathy and Becky that we know. And the other ones, it seems to be like you don't have a blood-soaked car in Keith and Cassandra.
No.
You don't have blood-soaked cars, but you have a blood-soaked car. You have blood in the car with Kathy and Becky.
Right. Although not enough blood for them to have died inside the Honda.
In there, right?
Because we asked the question of the FBI investigators, and they said, no, we think they were killed elsewhere. And actually, one of the earmarks of the Colonial Parkway murders is this movement post-mortem of the cars and sometimes the bodies and some elements.
Absolutely.
And the investigators have used, I'm talking about the FBI and VSP investigators, have used the expression elements of staging. In other words, they feel like the cars are moved after the murders, and that's a signature, and they feel the cars are staged to some extent to create certain impressions. Certainly things like moving Daniel Lauer's Chevrolet from one side of I-64, which would be heading down to Virginia Beach. The car is found completely on the opposite side of the road on the mirror image rest stop. As you said, that could be just serving a purpose for the killer or killers, but it also creates an impression that the car was headed back towards Amelia County, Virginia, which is their point of origin, not Virginia Beach, which is where they were going.
So let me make it something very clear about staging. Staging only occurs in cases where there is a relationship between the victim and the offender. The purpose of staging from a crime scene stager's perspective is to distance himself or herself from being named as the primary suspect. So when you're talking about staging, which is the deliberate tampering or manipulation of evidence, whether it be physical or behavioral or in written evidence in a homicide case, in order to apply the principles of empirical staging research to these scenes, you would be making the assumption that the killers knew all 8 victims.
Which I don't think you can do, right?
Right. So when you can conclusively say, you know what, these victims, the offenders didn't know all of these victims. There were no relationships. Staging is for the purpose of hiding the relationship. So like I teach my investigators, you know, if you walk in and you discover this scene is staged, it's a freebie. It's a freebie. The offender's telling you, hey, guess what? I knew the victim. Hello, I knew the victim. This is what that's why they stage. They stage because they knew the victim. If you don't know the victim, you're not going to be the primary suspect. If you have no relationship to the victim, you are not going to be named a primary suspect. The purpose of staging from that standpoint is to distance him or herself from the relationship he has or she has with the victim. So to opine that staging, by the criminological definition of staging, is present in these cases, except for Kathy and Becky, I cannot see where that is running concurrent. Could there be a lot of other things we don't know, you know, that's in the case files that would change my opinion? Of course. Could that be? Yes. For me, as an expert in staging, and I do staging every day of my life, you know, my whole life and career is dedicated to staged homicides, much of which sometimes they do turn into serial homicides because they don't get caught, you know, on the first or second one. So we have plenty of serial killer cases here that by definition are serial killers, but they are staged intimate partner homicides, one after the next, after the next, after the next. In this case, could you have a jealous person? Could you have a jealous person that, you know, someone that loved Keith and didn't want him dating anyone else? A woman? You could.
It's possible, right?
Yeah, women do stuff like that, you know, just because never underestimate a woman. And people do underestimate women.
Constantly.
People definitely, we have many victims here who are male victims killed by female intimate partners. So it is just not beyond the scope of imagination in our world here. Domestic violence, we have the primarily female victims, but we have plenty of male victims. And most of the time, male victims aren't considered in domestic violence. The primary victims are women. And so most people think domestic violence is about women, children, and animals, but we have plenty of men murdered by women whose cases are here. Can they hold a man at gunpoint? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Could they hold a couple at gunpoint? Absolutely. There is nothing that excludes women from being offenders in this case. Now, what could exclude women from being an offender in this case would be the fact that they cannot physically lift people or move people or things like that. They could be excluded based on that. But could you exclude them based on the fact that women don't do this? No, that's a myth.
So, as much as we wish that we could hand this whole case over to you in the murder room so that you could use your 98% solve rate to solve it.
Oh, yeah.
Unfortunately,
we do too.
We can't.
I'm
we would love it
too. Yeah, because we would solve them. And, the murder room is a place that gets you to manner of death. If there's a question of manner of death, it helps kind of get you straightened out between homicide or suicide, for example. But then once you get, if it's already ruled homicide and it's a homicide, then is it a normal scene, what we call normal scenes, or is it a stage scene? Normal scenes are not manipulated.
Right.
And stage scenes are manipulated to appear like a legitimate death, like a suicide, like a botched robbery, like a home invasion, like even natural death or some other kind of homicide, so it gets you to that point. Then the flexibility of the matrices, we would then be able to adapt to solve a case like this. I would love that too. But in order to do that, every once in a while, the murder room, while it does have a 98% solve rate, the victimology is typically the most critical for us there. And sometimes we come up with, say you have 5 suspects, like in Kathy and Becky's murders, because they look anger retaliatory. I would say, you look at everybody that's in conflict with them. Mm-hmm. And then are there any breakups with the other people? Somebody in conflict because of a breakup with any of the other couples or something.
So what would your recommended next steps be to the people who are doing the investigating on this? What would your recommended next steps be to move this case forward again and toward a conclusion?
I have to believe that they have done everything under the sun that they can think of to do to get these cases resolved. I would imagine that being the FBI and being the state police, they have moved mountains to be able to get as far as they have. I have no idea what they have done or what they haven't done, but sure. what I would do is I would definitely recommend a research-based forensic victimological studies on every single victim. And that is not a typical way of doing victimology. Victimology is typically an analytical study, but wait, if you're going to do an analytical study, that means that you are taking the whole, which is the person, breaking the person down in little sections of a person, meaning like lifestyle, routine activities, mental health, physical health, relationships. So you're going to do that. And the way we do it here is with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Okay. When you use Maslow's hierarchy of needs as your scaffolding and your theoretical framework for victimological studies, basically what you have is the first thing Maslow says we all need is like shelter and water. Mm-hmm. The next essentials. Level up, the essentials. You can't live if you don't have shelter and water.
Right.
So then the next level up is safety and security. You got to have a place to live. You can't live in circumstances that are not conducive to human life. So you'd have to have a place to live. The third level up is love and belonging. And that's where your relationships come in. 99% of our homicide victims, where you find the breakdown in their Maslow's hierarchy of needs is in level 3. Okay. You find that they have conflict with somebody, whether it is a preceding conflict that precedes the murder. So it's either a breakup, it's debt, it's an affair, it's an unwanted pregnancy, it's something. There's a million reasons, right? And then when you get to the 4th level of, the accomplishments and things like that, self-esteem, like that's based on people kind of getting to a place in life where they sort of start to cruise a little bit, where they have accomplished some things and they feel good about themselves. We don't find as much breakdown there. And then in level 5, the self-actualization of a human being, not everybody reaches those. A lot of people never reach self-actualization. But when you study the entire human that you have as a victim and you put it in that hierarchy, and just like the murder room and the color system where we use red, yellow, and green, we do the same thing when we study the victim. Anything we can prove about the victim is green. Anything that we can sort of prove called quasi-empirical is yellow, and non-empirical is red. So when you get there to that level 3, that's where you're going to find anybody that had any kind of problem whatsoever from stranger to spouse and be able to identify any particular person that could be interconnected with all of these 8 victims, or there was just no preceding conflict. Some people don't even know there's conflict between 2 people. Some people are very private. They don't tell anybody. So I would do that. That would be my number one thing, is that I would start, and it would be a long process. It may take a year just to do the victimological studies on 8 different victims. And then from there, I would then probably, I'm not a big person on categorizing and labeling crime scenes per se. In these crime scenes, yes, we can definitely see anger and rage and all of these things in Kathy and Becky, but I tend to steer away from black and white thinking when it comes to crime scene. And I think that that's a really, really smart way of being here, because we don't know if they're robbery, property crime related. We don't know if they're personal gain related for another reason. And so levels of sophistication, I'm not a person who believes in the dichotomy of organized or disorganized. I believe that organization happens along a continuum.
Right.
That you have organized on one end and disorganized on the other end, and you have a slider along that continuum, and you slide that bar in relation to every piece. So when it comes to like the wound pattern, is it sophisticated, or I'm sorry, is it organized or disorganized? Well, you might have, you might be in the middle on that one. But when it comes to how everything is in the crime scene, where there's nothing disturbed, you might be really far on the organized side on that element of the murder, right? So for me, I steer students away from locking down into organized or disorganized or any other dichotomy like that. And instead take all the dichotomies and put them on a slider, put them on a continuum, and take that continuum and then break down each piece and apply the organized, disorganized continuum, or whatever continuum you're using, and put the slider. Is it 80%? Is it 20%? You know what I mean? So that's the other thing I would do, because I think that once you start moving those sliders on the different dichotomies of, sophistication, is it sophisticated or unsophisticated? Is it organized or is it disorganized? It's kind of like, is it day or is it night? Things like that. Yeah. Then you start actually identifying any kind of thematic evidence that you might have. You may be able to identify themes in that way. So those would be like probably the first few things that I would be doing in this case.
Thank you so much to Dr. Laura Pettler for joining us and giving us your insights on the Colonial Parkway murders. It was such a pleasure speaking to you today.
Thank you both. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Kristin, for having me. It's been my pleasure to be with you here today and to hang out with you for a while. Please let me know if there's anything I can ever do to help in this case. And if there's anything I can do for Mind Over Murder, please let me know as well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to Mind Over Murder. We'll talk to you next time.
Mind Over Murder is a production of Absolute Zero and Another Dog Productions.
Our executive producers are Bill Thomas and Kristin Dilley.
Our logo art is by Pamela Arnois.
Our theme music is by Kevin MacLeod.
Mind Over Murder is distributed in partnership with Crawl Space Media.
You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram.
You can also follow our page on the Colonial Parkway Murders on Facebook.
And finally, you can follow Bill Thomas on Twitter at BillThomas56.
Thank you for listening to Mind Over Murder.